Am I back from Hawaii or am I not back from Hawaii? Stay tuned. Let's find out.
I'm Anthony. Welcome to No Vacancy Live. That's my friend Glenn.
You're watching the #1 show in hospitality.
Hello, one and all. Welcome to No Vacancy Live. This is, of course, your friendly neighborhood Glenn here. Anthony will be back tomorrow. He's closing deals, making stuff happen. I don't know. I'm just back from vacation. I don't know what's going on over here. I did get to stay over at this incredible hotel, the Kona in Kona, thanks to our friends over at Outrigger. Also, I want to thank the good folks over at Radisson for being a big supporter of the show. And as you guys know, shortly, they're going to be becoming part of the family over at Choice Hotels. And I know that your investment right now in Radisson will take you even further than you expected with great brands such as Radisson Blue, Radisson Red, Country Inn and Suites, and many more behind it. Sure, you talk to our friend Phil Hugh over there, RadissonHotelsAmerica.com/EN-US/development. All right, so today's going to be a great show for two reasons. Number one, I went to a concert last night, so let's see if I can hold up an interview after having a lot of fun last night. But secondly, we're going to be talking about a critical and important issue. And you know how important this is, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that kind of stuff. We make it a focal point here at No Vacancy, and once or twice a month, we make sure to dedicate full shows to helping make sure that all folks out there get equity in hospitality. I personally have had incredible advantages, and I would like others to have those advantages as well. And I know a few people here that are really behind that. Is the team behind the recently launched DEI Advisors, the incredible David Kong, the amazing Rachel Humphrey, and the fantabulous Lan Elliot are joining me today. Hello, everyone. How are you today?
Good morning. How are you?
Thanks
for having us.
Great to see you. So best place to start this off is, David, you did so much in your career, all of those years as CEO over at Best Western, and now you're taking on this new venture. But before we go into that, what was that adjustment like, going from go, 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 being a CEO to all of a sudden, kind of being calm and relaxed? It reminds me of that picture of former President Obama, the day he left when he was in the hang glider or something at Richard Branson's private island, that joy of having no responsibility. What was that transition like for you?
You nailed it on the head. I like the fact that there's no responsibility, waking up in the morning, not having to worry about what's going to happen that day in the company and all the personnel matters that goes along with it. Right.
Yeah. So how long did it take you? I feel like you were up to something with this prior to you even left. We discussed it at your final Best Western conference that you had something going on. So how long did it take all of you folks, David, to come up with this idea, and why DEI Advisors? Why are you passionate about this? Why is this essential for you?
Okay, well, a little bit of background. As you know, I was at Best Western for a very long time, and I've always been invited to the CEO panels at major industry conferences. And for a long time, I've noticed that I'm often the only minority representation at these CEO panels. And obviously that's not right. And everyone recognizes that we need to change it and improve the situation. And I'm delighted to see that a lot of hotel companies have really taken this to heart, and they've developed some wonderful programs to try to improve the situation. There are programs in terms of recruitment and development and promotions and so on and so forth. And these are just wonderful programs. These companies have set very, very aggressive goals, and I wish them a lot of luck. At the same time, from the years of interviewing a lot of candidates for these senior level positions, I've learned that sometimes individuals are just not ready for the position,
right?
Although they are being considered for those positions. And that's in terms of their mindset not being ready, as well as the knowledge and skill set not being there. So this DEI Advisors organization that we formed, and I want to give a shout out to Rachel and Lan for helping me launch it. Otherwise, it would have never happened. It was really a labor of love. in many ways, and I appreciate their collaboration and their support. We were able to launch it, and the mission of the organization is really to help individuals learn how they can broaden their horizon, how they can acquire the necessary knowledge and skill set, and how they can have the proper mindset to actually be considered for those high-level executive positions.
I love what you're saying, David. And Rachel, I think this really cuts through right to the issue. I think a lot of times when it comes to these particular issues, we've been dancing around what the root cause of some of these problems are. And that is, there may be a desire to get certain individuals into higher positions. However, you are always struck with, if that person doesn't have opportunity early on, they don't necessarily get the same level of skills as someone who might have taken a different path. So tell us a little bit about how you folks are going to try to create that equity before they walk into that interview to put everyone on that equal playing field.
Well, I think, Glenn, and thanks for having us. I think that it's a combination of things. I think we have to change the mindset of hiring managers and decision makers who are placing those. But then because there's hundreds of thousands of talented executives waiting and ready and willing and interested in that next step. But then at the same time is continuing to develop the future leaders and making sure that they have opportunities. And one thing that I think that DEI Advisors is going to give the option for is for future leaders to hear the amazing stories of current hospitality industry leadership. When you look around the industry, no two stories are the same. There are people who this is a recent foray into hospitality. There are some that have gone through hospitality school programs and have spent their entire careers, some overcoming incredible challenges, taking very different paths. And so you and I know, David, Lan, when we are on this conference circuit, we get to hear tremendous stories from all of these leaders about how they got to the positions they hold today. But if you're not on that circuit, how do you have access to those stories? And so these videos, these interviews that we're doing are really giving an opportunity. They're barrier-free. There's no membership. There's no costs. They're available on LinkedIn, YouTube, our website, Facebook, for anyone who wants to hear how different leaders got their start. And if something resonates with that person, that's great. If somebody finds something relatable, that's amazing. But really just giving an audience an ability to hear these tremendous stories, because this is a great industry and there are a lot of ways to get into it. There's a lot of ways to rise through it and to achieve whatever level of success you want. So on the employee side, that's really, DEI Advisors' objective is to help empower each individual to reach their own. The conversation about changing the mindset in decision makers, that's a bigger discussion and an important one as well, because there are a tremendous number of qualified, interested candidates looking for those executive leadership roles.
Right. And we absolutely must focus on that, because I think people tend to hire people that are like themselves if you're talking about unconscious bias. But on the flip side, Lan, and I'll bring this to you, I think that a lot of what we're talking about for folks trying to achieve more maybe has to do around that confidence issue. And I think a lot of this has to do with sharing stories to build people's confidence in themselves and what they can achieve. When you look at something like Mr. Kong over there has achieved, coming over from Hong Kong, starting at, you started as minimum wage employee, right, David? And then being able to achieve so much as an Asian man, I think is inspirational. So how does that confidence thing play into what you're trying to do, Lan?
Well, I think part of it is just with the stories, as we talked about, is sharing different leaders' stories. I was just actually watching yesterday Hilda from JLL, her wonderful interview with David, and she talks about imposter syndrome and that she feels it every day. And it's actually, she looks at it as a positive thing, as a way to continue to push yourself for continuous growth. And that there's always more to learn and to achieve. And I think that speaks to DEI Advisors' mission, is that every person has the ability to grow their own skills and re-examine the way they're looking at their career and their progression and what can they do to make themselves better. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. And to share that those stories are still ongoing, even with these leaders that we look up to, and are really inspiring, they still go through it every day, and how they handle those things, overcoming challenges, and continuing to grow their career skill set.
Yeah, I think the imposter syndrome is something that most people feel, but really don't discuss. I've been trying to be more open and honest about that too, particularly as I've become more visible in this particular industry. I still feel like everyone's going to catch on and put me out on the sidelines. But David, what are some of the stories that you've been seeing out there that really play into this? You know what? You can do it too because I was able to.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful stories because every interview we ask the person their career journey and the lessons they learned along the way. For example, one of the earlier interviews I had with Heather McCrory was the CEO of Accor Hotels in Central and North America. She talked about how she was always in sales and marketing, and she realized that that was a silo type of thinking, and she needed to broaden her horizon. So she went into an MBA program, got an MBA. At the same time, she asked to go into operations, and she started working as a general manager at a hotel. And that's how she became eligible and was considered and eventually selected for the position of CEO. Wow. You talk to others. There are just so many wonderful stories along the way. Pat Pacious talked about his background in the military service and how he worked for different consulting firms, and he got hired by Choice Hotels. And from there, he was put into technology, a job that a lot of people just didn't feel comfortable with. He did that for a few years, and next thing you know, he has broadened his horizon, he's gained a knowledge base, and he's considered and selected for that position. So there are just so many wonderful stories. Gilda actually had a wonderful interview. I learned so much from her. She talked about the mentorship. A lot of us are fortunate to have mentors along the way to help us with our career. She talked about not having a formal mentor, but she used every situation to learn from the situation. And that learning is as good as any mentor can give you. So it's the capacity as well as a willingness to learn from every situation, every failure, every success, whether it's good or bad, whatever happens to you, you can always learn from it. So that's the kind of perspective and learning that you can get from watching those interviews. And it's just, as Rachel was saying earlier, it's a free resource. I wish more people would avail themselves to it because these are just wonderful interviews.
Yeah, they certainly are. I highly encourage everybody to check those out. And then when you're done listening to all the DEI interviews, make sure you check from September 22nd, 2021. We had Heather McCrory on, and she talks all about what it was like growing up in the Canadian hospitality industry, including starting out like you did, was pretty much a minimum wage worker, but she was at the Fairmont Banff. Love that. Love that property so much. Rachel, so what is one of the stories that has inspired you that you think is really resonating with the younger folks out there that, could see that path forward to success through the others' experiences?
I think there's a couple. One that I did not conduct was actually Jeff Pilates, and I have heard Jeff speak many times, but I was very surprised to learn that Jeff was terminated from his first job in hospitality, but for his champion on the property who said, you know what, go home for a couple of days and come back. I'm going to teach you the ropes. Who knows what his hospitality industry path would have been. And I found that incredible given how many times I've visited with Jeff. There's other things. Jagriti Panwala, who I obviously know very, very well, has an incredible story across.
Little context. She's a former chairwoman of AHOA, and Jeff Pilates, of course, runs Wyndham. Please continue.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then Melissa Mayer, who recently retired from Expedia, was their first chief inclusion officer, a new role at a time that no companies were focusing on that. And so getting to hear her story of how she walked in with a business plan, said, this is why it's needed. This is why I'm the person to lead this. Ways that I feel like I am not as an executive or as a leader, and was really inspired to hear her journey. I mean, so many of them, honestly. I think that with each one, both that I conduct and I listen to, I learn so much more about everyone. And that what ties it all together is, like I said earlier, how different everyone's story is, how much we all love the industry, and how deeply those right now in leadership want to continue to empower and bring up the next generation of leaders. It's a very exciting time for sure.
And that is the incredible thing about our beloved industry, is that no matter who you are or where you're from, you can have incredible success. You can come over from another continent and become CEO of a major hotel company. You know, you could start your own podcasting thing. You could help run a major industry organization, all from just starting wherever and finding your path. Lan, I find that things are actually changing now, not just because of this initiative, but the Castell project, which is now partnered with AHLA. They're all coming under the same banner. I feel like finally we might be going from lip service when it comes to this side of the business to actually focusing on it and trying to bring real results. Is that an accurate assessment of what you see is happening, number one? And number two, if so, what's changed? Why now, finally?
Well, I definitely think that this is a moment in time where we've seen much more focus on advancing women and underrepresented groups. I don't think I've ever seen this level of momentum. When I came up in the industry, I looked around for resources, and there were very few. I would have loved to have had DEI Advisors and some of the other programs. And I think what speaks to it is, for example, just on advancing women, how many organizations there are. And, Rachel's other hat is she has started an organization, which she can tell you about, to bring together.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that in just 1 second. You're leading us into it beautifully. Yeah. All right, go back to what you're saying.
So that's one thing. But I do think that the focus thus far has really been around hiring. And right. As I talk to headhunters, I'm always trying to make sure I give them many, many names of women for positions that they reach out to me for, so that they have more women that they can present. And we talk about that. Juliette Boone talks about it in her interview about how important it is to present more than one diverse candidate if they're going to have a chance to get hired. I do think kind of the next piece of it, though, is it's going to be more than just hiring diverse candidates. It's really giving them the tools and helping them to succeed. But if you hire people and you bring them into an organization that really isn't set up to have those diverse discussions and many different points of view, it can be really challenging. So I think we obviously have more work to do. One is to bring more diverse people in. Two is to get comfortable having conversations with very, very different people who have different backgrounds. It might not just be on race and gender. It might be socioeconomic, it might be other backgrounds, but learning to meld all those different points of view so that we have stronger discussions, stronger solutions. I think that's going to be really important. And to keep them in the companies, we're going to need to have really visible role models. So I think we're doing great. And I love that so many companies are putting projects and requirements into place to motivate people to hire more. But I do think we have more to do. And so it's an exciting time to be in the industry and see the progress that's being made.
I totally agree. We'll get to the Women in Hospitality Alliance in just a second, but David, I feel compelled to ask you when it comes to these particular issues. I see a lot of underrepresented folks still being put into positions about you're going to be in charge of folks that are unrepresented. I feel that we still need to get them into positions that have nothing to do with their race, color, religious orientation, all of that kind of stuff. Are we actually making progress there too?
I think we're making very good progress. I mean, compare the situation we're in now to before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, there's no conversation about DEI at all.
Right.
But now, I mean, at every industry conference, there are tracks that are dedicated to DEI, and there are awards given based on DEI, and it's a tremendous recognition in the industry that it's good for business and it's something that we need to do, and it's the right thing to do. So I see a sea change in this regard. And, we can talk about programs all day. We all know that programs don't have any staying power because it's just a program. It's just something that we do today. And it doesn't have any staying power. But so it needs to be a cultural shift. Just needs to be part of our value and beliefs that having diversity, equity, and inclusion is good for business. And there are all kinds of studies from McKinsey and others that would illustrate the point that having inclusion and diversity actually improves the operating results of any company. So we need to believe in that. We need to think that it's the right thing to do. It's a fair thing to do. And it's good for business.
You know, what I'm seeing here is this coming together, and particularly, Rachel, with this Women in Hospitality Alliance, which is going to bring together, was it 18 different groups together under a common goal? It reminds me of what everyone in our incredible business has been able to achieve when it comes to awareness about human trafficking. Nobody was talking about it. And then everybody kind of said, this is important. And everybody got together, and they're all in each of their respective corners, got together and created such visibility. I can't go through an airport or a hotel right now without having an understanding that this is a real issue. How do you see the Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance achieving that same sort of swell of recognition for this issue?
No, I think that's a great question. I think the greatest advantage for the Alliance right now is the ability to amplify one another's messaging. As you mentioned, there are 18, or there are many more, but there are 18 in our Alliance that are doing tremendous work individually in very different areas. Each has lanes that it is mastering. They've got great volunteers. They've got resources behind it. But there's only so much that each can do individually. When we come together and we make sure that we are sharing one another's messaging, that we are not duplicating efforts, that if there are open lanes, someone's raising their hand to take it, but that we're not stepping on each other's toes, if we're sharing resources, the ability to advance that needle farther and faster is going to be evident. We're never going to be on opposite sides of advancing women in hospitality leadership. Right. But to take these exceptional organizations and give them a forum to collaborate, to share ideas, to amplify one another's efforts is a great opportunity. It's not unique. There are lots of, coalitions, alliances that gather for like-minded things. But at the time that I started talking to people in October and November, there wasn't one in this space. And so I'm really excited to see not just the tremendous momentum, but how really impactful. You mentioned that the conversation seems to be happening now at a much higher level across the industry. And so to bring awareness to all of these groups doing great work, that can only benefit the industry and the women that we're trying to inspire and elevate.
Excellent. My goodness, Marlene Colucci, great to see you. David Kind, it's great to see you, Marlene. Yeah, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic out there. So this is such a critical, important issue. But if I'm a young person and I'm still feeling a little bit intimidated, Lan, what are some of the things that I could do to make myself gain that confidence, feel more comfortable, and know that I, as a human being, will be able to achieve what those that may not have looked like me achieved before?
Well, I think part of what we want to do with the videos is to help inspire, especially young people who are coming up. I think there is something to be said for being intentional about networking and starting to build the people that you know. We had, Ashley Johnson recently that I interviewed, and she talked about being intentional and collecting business cards. And at that time, not just collecting business cards, but being intentional about developing those relationships for the long term and coming to people and getting to know them when you don't need something from them. So it just starts to build that network where they're just not a name, they're actually someone that you can get to know. And I think that is part of what builds confidence when you're early in your career, that you start to know people, and then you have people that you can lean on. You can certainly find people in your organization to talk to, peers to talk with, to motivate one another. But if that isn't your situation in your company, reach out. It's such a wonderful industry, is that I found that when people reach out and ask for help, I've very rarely seen anybody say no. And so I think the ability to connect with different people and hear their stories. You could do it with DEI advisors, but you can also do it with your peers and other people around you to help inspire you and to keep you going.
Wonderful. And of course, Ashley Johnson is formerly with HOA, now running the Howard University School of Business, Marriott Sorensen Center for Hospitality Leadership. And of course, Howard University is a historically Black college. So it's a really great place for her to be to help share the wonders of our industry. David, what did you learn about yourself and achievement in those early days of your career when you were, bussing tables and doing that sort of thing in Honolulu?
Yeah, as an immigrant, I was always taught that, especially with Asian culture, that, the key to success is heads down, do a good job,
Right.
And sooner or later people would take notice and you'll get ahead. But such is not the case, actually. One has to learn to network, as Lan was saying, and you have to find champions and advocates for you who would speak up on your behalf, because, especially for us, we are not comfortable tooting our own horn. And even if you were comfortable in doing that, you don't want to do that too often because
Right.
people might take offense to it. So learning to network and finding champions and advocates in the organization that would speak up on your behalf is really key. And I learned that from early on in my career. I had expressed interest in being the restaurant manager to the food and beverage director. Actually, I had the chance to meet with him and express that interest. And next thing you know, he put me in a fast track program to achieve that. And then I started dreaming about being the food and beverage director and started dreaming about being a GM. And along the way, I always expressed my interest and asked for help. And that's how I eventually landed in those positions. But aside from the networking and finding advocates, you need to give something to people to work on so they can help you. So you need to really enrich yourself with every opportunity you have. I remember when I first came to this country, I didn't really know much about all the liquor that's served in a
Right.
restaurant. I used to go to the supermarket and take out my pen and paper and write down all the names of the different brands of liquor, just so that I would be conversant. So if people would all of that I would know. And later on, I did the same thing for wine. I studied extensively on wine. So I became kind of like the wine expert in the restaurant and in the hotel. And so we need to find ways to enrich ourselves, find ways to learn new things and broaden our perspective. This is something that many of the people that I interview have said also, that you always need to broaden your horizon, that you need to find ways to acquire the knowledge and skill sets so you can be successful. Now, we also said earlier about the mindset. Sometimes we shortchange ourselves thinking that we are not adequate. And Gilda did mention that when she's in that situation, she just positioned herself as, I'm just different. I'm not any inferior than anyone. I'm just different than the rest of you. And that's how she coped with it. And that's how she actually excelled. But if you watch the interviews that I had with Renee Caballari, who wrote the very famous book, Head Trash, Amazon bestseller, one of the actor George Clooney's favorite books, you learn so many useful, practical tips as to what to do when you are feeling like you don't belong, or you're feeling negative about yourself, that maybe you're not adequate. Maybe this position is not for you, how you can shift your mindset to become positive and constructive and begin to be yourself, be genuine to yourself, and let your authenticity reflect who you really are. So there are just so many useful tips that I learned through interview, but many of them I practiced along the way as I was coming up the ladder.
Yeah, it's interesting because you probably didn't even realize you were doing some of these things. You were just going ahead and being in the moment. But a fear could really hold us back. Particularly, I like what you said about being aware of your cultural upbringing and how that might be a little different. And the culture you grew up in was a little bit more demure, where I think it's fair to say I grew up in a culture that was a little bit more in your face, right? So we all have to approach things a little bit differently and understand what some of the things that are holding us back and what are some of the things that might make us too much that we might have to temper at the same time. Rachel, throughout your career, how did you network? How did you create those valuable relationships with potential mentors or women mentors? We need a new word, I think, for that, in order to help bring you along in your career.
Yeah, I don't know that I was intentional about that. I think when I came, when I joined hospitality as a second career, I've had a first career as a trial lawyer. And that whole world is completely different from the world of hospitality. But
I'm sure you did a lot of networking with juries, though, get them to like you.
When I did begin my career as an association executive in hospitality, you meet a lot of people. And what I've realized in my retirement is I thought everybody had the relationships that I had. But it turns out that everybody knows a lot of people, but not necessarily has those same relationships. And so I think it's just that I genuinely like people. I like to hear about what they're doing. I like to hear David talking about his grandchildren. I like to hear Lan talking about her travels. And so you're actually building genuine relationships with people. And what I've realized along the way is that not everybody networks the same way. I've never picked up a golf club in my life. One time I was told my field hockey swing did not translate into golf. But I'm not a golfer. I'm not going to be at the bar at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I do write, as many of you will know, handwritten notes. I was raised in a family of handwritten notes, and I've written thousands of them, and people remember it. Or reaching out, even if I don't have a topic to say, are you going to be at Alice or at lodging? Let's just sit down and catch up. And by building those one step at a time, I didn't realize at the time how deep those relationships were. And now as I look at things like the Alliance, which are created out of the relationships that I was fortunate enough to develop when I was working. The same thing with Lan and David and I with DEI Advisors, both in terms of reaching out to the people that we'd like to share their stories. Those are based on relationships that we each have with different people. And so I can't emphasize enough that for everybody, they'll have to figure out their own path to building relationships. And there is actually a lot of, not to sound like an infomercial, but a lot of our advisors actually talk about what their strategy is, because they are all incredibly different. And I wanted to just very quickly, Glenn, touch on something you mentioned a second ago when you talk about a lack of confidence. I think that we all assume that the leaders that we see out there, the four of us on this podcast included, are very confident every second of every day. And I think what you find through the interviews, what we find through talking with each other is we all have insecurities, or we all have new things to learn. You know, we all came up in a day of no cell phones, no internet, no social media. There was nobody talking.
That's the only reason why I have a job today, by the way.
All of us can say the same thing. But in looking now at how we are all growing, where I was, people ask, advice to a 22-year-old self. 22-year-old self, the world is so incredibly different than today. And so really, I was asked to speak at a conference recently, and they said, when you introduce yourself, make sure to describe what you look like physically, because we want all of our visually impaired attendees to have a visual. I've never had someone ask that, but I thought, that's an amazing way to be more inclusive and to make sure that we are thinking about others. Those are things that you would never have thought of, 30 years ago when I entered the work world. So what I loved in the interviews was hearing the insecurities or hearing the self-doubts and how people talk themselves out of it. I think head trash is a great way of describing it. And Rini does such a good job of walking us through the steps, but we each have different ways of making sure that our positive support systems are louder than our own voices or louder than naysayers. And so I think that anyone who thinks that the leaders of today don't have insecurities or question confidence it's just not accurate.
All right. So what are you insecure about, Rachel? I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours. Yeah.
No, Glenn, I'll tell you, you mentioned, imposter syndrome. I grew up in a tiny town in New Hampshire. I didn't come from much money. I didn't have opportunities to travel. It was, before we got one radio station if the weather was nice. We had no cable TV. We had no cell phones. to think that anyone finds me newsworthy. I think it's a hard thing to wrap my head around. You know, the kids this morning were giving me a hard time. Mom's internet famous again today after yesterday. That's a lot. It's a lot to take in. And so just continuing to grow and learn. And, you know, I'm lucky to have Lan and David teaching me so much at this stage of my career, listening to the videos. I don't listen to them because I have to. I listen to them because I want to hear how everybody else manages through it. I mean, if you take insecurities, all four of us were involved in leading through a pandemic. Talk about bringing out every insecurity you could possibly have. You know, as a trial lawyer, I actually interviewed Chip yesterday. I'm really excited for people to see it, but we talked about.
And she's referring to Chip Rogers of the AHLA.
Right. Taking a chance on a retired trial lawyer as an association person, and then becoming the chief operating officer, and then the interim CEO. Those are things, that progress, looking at that now, I have to take a step back and think that is not the 5-year-old girl in the town in New Hampshire that, you know, I won't say we didn't have electricity or transportation. We had some things, but it's just a very different, I'm in a different place today. I'm in a great place today than probably my 5-year-old self would have envisioned.
Right, for sure. So, Lan, before we start heading into some final thoughts and wrapping up today, with all of these great organizations that are out there, 18 of which are all coming together in the Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance, and plenty of others, it sounds to me that one good way to supercharge your career is maybe joining one, two, several of these organizations to tap into the resources there and for great networking. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. Actually, that is how I ended up in DEI Advisors, as I had joined. I want to do more with helping advance women, and I started working with Castell Project, which is now part of AHLA, and started working with them on Castell at College to bring leaders to hospitality programs around the country. The side effect of that is that we developed an amazing group of over 300 women who were panelists, and that became actually a networking opportunity. But it was through that work that I ended up at the January meeting of the first alliance meeting that Rachel had set up, and that's how I met David and found out that he wanted to do the interviews, and it's something that I had been thinking about doing this year. So I think just getting involved in those kinds of organizations will lead you to meeting so many like-minded people. And I think there's a lot of people who are really purpose-driven at this point, and it's been really wonderful. And we've all discovered new things as we've worked to set up DEI Advisors together. We've all had to learn new skills together. So it's been really interesting and a great growth opportunity.
Excellent. Now, David, I'd love to get some final thoughts from you, but before that, give us one thing people in positions of power could do to help bring along the next generation of amazing professionals. David, did you hear?
Inclusion and diversity is not only the right thing to do, but good for business.
Excellent. Rachel, what about you? What's one thing a person in a position of power can do to help give success to some of the younger folks out there, or give them an avenue towards success? And then some good final thoughts.
I'll give you two. Sit down for an interview with DEI Advisors and share your stories so that the next generation or future.
Good one.
Hear it. You're welcome. And the second would really be open your mind when you're making decisions about, developing your team, bringing on hires, promoting, to really be thinking about what makes someone qualified and give opportunities to maybe, I hate the word non-traditional, but there's a lot of non-traditional candidates that may not have the path that you envision, but maybe more than qualified and successful in the role.
Excellent. And of course, you can find all these interviews at DEIadvisors.org and on YouTube. Lan, how about you? Some final thoughts?
Along the same lines, I'd love to see some senior leaders and C-suite executives mentor women and underrepresented groups to go and find people who don't look like you, and spend some time with them, get to know them, and help them develop some of the skills and mindsets that David spoke about earlier.
Right. And I would like to add to that. Yes, I 100% agree. But for you folks that are going to take advantage of that, take advantage of that. Anthony and I have been blessed with the opportunity to speak to a lot of younger people, but then they don't stick to it. I don't know if it's a confidence issue or whatever, but a lot of times these people are busy and it's up to you to keep going back to them. We want to help. We want to be there for you, but you do have to keep at it, because nobody is just going to help you along if you're not going to help yourself. But if you do, everyone's going to be there for you. I see you guys nodding, so I think you've probably been through this before. So don't be discouraged if you're younger. Keep at it. Talk to us. We're here to help you. Drop us a line. And in that spirit, how can we reach out to all of you folks out there in a way that you could help out? Mr. Kong?
I think a lot has been said already, but there's so much resources on our website, DEIadvisors.org, and through the alliance that Rachel had spearheaded and coalesced 18 different organizations. There are tremendous resources in every one of those on every one of those websites as well. If you're interested in moving ahead, I mean, you got to empower yourself to do that. You can't just count on others to hand it over to you. I hope you can take the initiative and do some research yourself and enrich yourself.
Wonderful. Perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to having you back to hear some incredible success stories about what you're accomplishing over at DEI Advisors. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one.
Appreciate having us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right. So that was excellent. That was inspiring. And remember what we're talking about here. It's a give, it's a take relationship. The people that are in power right now, you've been successful. Think about those people that helped you along the way and how you can now do the same and give back to the generation that follows. And all of you young people out there, don't be scared. Remember, there used to be a time when I was a little shy wallflower. I was afraid to walk into a room. I was afraid to network. But somehow I chipped away at that time after time after time. And several years went by before I reached that level of confidence in order to be able to seek out those relationships. So don't be discouraged if right out of the gate in our instant gratification society, it doesn't work out for you immediately. It will, but you have to put in the time, you have to put in the effort, and partner with the right mentors like the incredible folks that are being interviewed at DEI Advisors. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. And be sure to download our audio podcast version. Find it at Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, wherever you get your shows. We are there. And if you happen to be listening to me right now and want to see our pretty faces, well, you can find us on YouTube, NoVacancyNews.com, Anthony's LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, our Facebook pages. You know where to go at this point. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. Thanks so much for being here. Remember, guys, you've got one life, so blaze on, which I'll be doing tonight. Again, second show at Fish. And as Anthony says, be kind to yourself. See y'all tomorrow.